all 6 weapons at each vent at Fordow went exactly where they were intended to go. A bomb has 3 effects that causes damage: blast, fragmentation, and overpressure. In this case, the primary kill mechanism in the mission space was a mix of overpressure and blast, ripping through the open tunnels and destroying critical hardware.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and joined once again with Jeff Berkowitz, Public Affairs TV in Chicago. Jeff, we're going to be talking about breaking news. That press conference that we're going to be talking more about just happened earlier today, where the chairman of the Joint Chief was going over the amount of damage from the bombing run in Iran over the weekend. But just a little bit ago in Chicago, and this is what we will be talking about first, Governor Pritzker had an announcement that he will be seeking another term, a 3rd term as governor of Illinois. Let's take a listen.
Are you ready for the fight? Illinois, are you ready for the fight? God bless our country, God bless our troops in perilous times, and God bless the great state of Illinois.
So, Jeff, Governor Pritzker is going to make a 3rd term for governor. That's the first time since 1986 that an Illinois governor has decided to run for a 3rd term. That was Jim Thompson back in the day. What's your reaction to today's news on Governor Pritzker?
Terry, those were talking points. There was a complete absence of substance. Nothing was said about the things that matter to the people of Illinois and what this Governor Pritzker has done in now 1.5 terms to make them better. Nothing about the $250 billion of unfunded pensions, nothing about the mess in Illinois Medicaid and healthcare, nothing about the illegal immigration expenditures that are taking the place of expenditures that could go to Illinois citizens, nothing about the outmigration, nothing about the declining GDP of Illinois, and the jobs are flat. All of those are negatives. The people know about it. So the question is, will there be a credible opponent for Pritzker? It appears there will. I predicted it will be Ted Dabrowski. People haven't heard much about him, but he will have message, organization, and money. Will there be a credible opponent to Pritzker's designee to be the next U.S. Senator, Juliana Stratton? Number one, she's going to have a bloody primary against Robin Kelly and Raja Krishnamurthy. She's going to come out of that wounded. And number two, the Republicans are going to have a highly credible U.S. Senate candidate, which they haven't had for quite some time, in the name of Richard Porter. I've predicted that. Those things will happen at the top of their ticket for Porter and for Dabrowski by mid-July, and that will be a major change. Nobody said anything about it. The Chicago media didn't cover anything that I've just said. They just throw out this rants by a governor saying, I'm here to fight. Are you ready to fight? No, we're ready to talk about the issues, and as media, we'll be fair to the governor. We'll ask him what he's done to this.
It's fair enough for the governor to have a rah-rah rally when you're announcing. That's not the time to be going over, as a policy wonk, the issues. But the Republicans have, in their own time, have the issues that they can run on. Pritzker likes to say that he had a balanced budget for every year that he's been the governor. The Republicans will surely take him to task for that, because many competent people have said what he has been passing has not been balanced budgets. And I want to play a clip from the governor testifying before the U.S. House of Representatives that was looking into what's going on with these cities and states that say they are sanctuaries for these illegal aliens that have crossed into the United States. Pritzker was grilled on that by Representative Byron Donalds of Florida.
Illinois spend on illegal immigration every year?
Again, illegal immigration, that's a federal responsibility. They could tell how much is wasted as a result of their failures.
Governor, don't you keep track of how many people are on your Medicaid rolls, how many people who are illegal immigrants in the state of Illinois who are getting actually benefits in your state? Doesn't your government keep track of that?
They don't get Medicaid in Illinois or any state, as far as I know.
Governor Pritzker, you do not keep track of any public service dollars in the state of Illinois that goes to illegal immigrants or goes to people in your state who are not legal residents of the United States. and of the state of Illinois? You don't keep track of that.
We absolutely keep track of our budget, and we're very closely, and in fact, it's been balanced for 7 years in a row.
So governor says he has balanced the budget all the time. But Jeff, we've heard from the House and Senate Republicans say, what about the money that you are spending on the illegal aliens, predominantly in the Chicago area, on healthcare and other costs that are over $1 billion? Now, the governor might say, we've come up with that money, but there are those who are going to say you haven't. And certainly there's going to be others who are saying you shouldn't be spending that money on these illegal aliens. You shouldn't be a sanctuary city in Chicago, and you shouldn't be a sanctuary state. So certainly those will be some of the issues. Expand upon what you were saying and tell us again more about, first of all, who is Ted Dabrowski, because that is a name that most people have not heard of.
Well, let me just start with that. We'll come back to Byron Donalds, the governor, in a minute. So Ted Dabrowski has been at Illinois Policy Institute for 7 years, preceding the last 7 years when he's been president of Wirepoint. And he has churned out, with his colleagues at Wirepoint, a tremendous amount of analysis that's easily understandable by the public on the failures of the Illinois public schools, not just Chicago, which is an outstanding example of failure, but Illinois schools. It's estimated barely a third of the students across the state of Illinois, in Decatur, and Quincy, and Bloomington. So we're not talking just Chicago, up into Elgin in the 8th Congressional District of the Chicago Northwest suburbs. All of those schools average no more than one, at a maximum, 40% of the kids reading at grade level, 60% don't. And most likely it's more like a third read at grade level, and maybe read at all. So Ted Dabrowski has studied that extensively. He makes it understandable by the populace at large. They know their kids aren't learning. They know their kids are being just passed from grade to grade, and they know they can't read and get jobs and so forth. And this particularly hits the minority areas, because they are the most in need of this education, because they're lacking often, not always, at home mentorship, at home guidance, etc. So that's not equity. That's a failure of equity. Dabrowski's written about that. We'll talk about that. The pensions, as you mentioned, Terry, the budgets are not balanced. They're terribly unbalanced. I've done 2 shows with experts who discuss this, who say you should be looking at what the actuaries say. They have actuaries on their staff. Pritzker does. And their actuaries would say, you're not putting enough money into the pensions, because they can't, because they've been run so poorly under Pritzker and others before him that there's too much going out.
We should mention there's about $240 billion in unfunded pension debt that benefits that are promised to be paid in the future, that there isn't money available to pay. And that bill is sooner or later going to come due. Now, people can always argue stats, but when you got $240 billion, that's a heck of a stat. You can't just wipe that. That's like an elephant under the carpet. You can no longer ignore the lump.
Well, and don't take our word for it, folks. Look to our shows, the shows I've done with James Sprayregan, an expert on restructuring in the private sector. He's shifted that analysis, that expertise, to the public sector. He said what we have just said. Sheila Weinberg, Truth in Accounting. I don't think Pritzker has anything like an independent experts that I've put forward to rebut what I've said. Now going to what we just saw with Byron Donalds. He made a slight mistake.
Who's running, by the way, for governor of Florida.
Right, and I think is the odds-on favorite to be the Republican candidate and to win the general election and to replace Ron DeSantis when his term is over. But getting back, Byron Donalds made a slight mistake. What the money that is being spent on illegal immigrants on health care is not on Medicaid. They're not doing that, so that's what the governor said. But they're spending $1 billion or $2 billion a year separately in their budget, not on Medicaid. They're just giving it, okay? And there are people on Medicaid that shouldn't be. That's for people in need. We have almost a third of our population in Illinois on Medicaid. So that has grown under Pritzker and grown under his Democratic Party predecessors, Democratic supermajority. We want people to be self-supporting. We want them to have health care. We want to help those who are in need. But if everybody's treated like they're in need, we can't help the people who are in need. So
well, and as we said, speaking of the people in need, how about the kids, as you were talking about, who aren't being educated in Chicago public schools? They fail, or we fail those children year after year because they go through with something like $29,000 being spent per pupil in Chicago public schools, and then only 10% can do reading or math at grade level. If you're going to run for governor, you can't just ignore that in the largest school district in your state, only 10% of the kids can read and do math at grade level. How is that preparing them for the future? And for whatever reasons, there's going to be probably a host of reasons why you're getting that 10%. I don't want to point to just one thing, but it's not a lack of money. It does seem to be a lack of leadership, I have to say, by the governor, because if you're the governor of the state, someone ought to take that board to task and say, why are you failing the students? So now, let me insert, to be fair to the governor, the state of Illinois has been doing financially better off than it was doing under Governor Rauner, because at least this governor is passing budgets. Now, this governor has an overwhelming majority of his party controlling the House and Senate. Governor Rauner did not have control of the legislature. So if Governor Rauner had had a Republican legislature in the House and Senate, his term would have been much different. So the governor can say he's been passing budgets. He says they're budget balanced. As we just said, we're saying many people say they're not. That will be an issue, I think, in this gubernatorial run. But Jeff, now also the other elephant in the room is everyone expects Governor Pritzker is going to run for president. So at what point is he going to be leaving the state to go across the nation and campaign in Iowa and campaign in New Hampshire, campaign in South Carolina? And so what kind of a governor is he going to be in a third term? That's another issue that the Republicans could bring up, since you're going to be running for president and handing the ball over to who? The lieutenant governor? She's going to be running for the U.S. Senate. So I'm not sure who's going to be running the store while the governor and lieutenant governor are on the campaign trail.
Well, and yes, I mean the point is he's not really running for governor. He's running to use the governorship of the state of Illinois, that beginning of the third term, for his presidential run. He seems to find that more convenient to use that bully pulpit, which he hasn't used to correct any of the problems that I've discussed, not education, not pensions, not job growth, nothing. So not having done that for 6 years, and then in the run-up to the 26th election, I don't expect he's going to be doing anything, because he's half running for president and for the Democratic nomination for president.
But before we move on, I want to get to the other issues. Let's talk about who is Richard Porter, that you said you predict. I want to emphasize it because it's easy to miss it when we say it once. You were predicting that Richard Porter will likely be a candidate for the U.S. Senate to replace Dick Durbin. First of all, who is Richard Porter? And secondly, the question is, can a Republican win statewide in Illinois? Because it hasn't been done since Rauner won his first and only term as governor.
Right, and you can do it if you have message, organization, and money. MOM, I like to say mom. And Porter's the guy who has a message. He's been dealing with national issues. His private sector
who
job
is he? Because most people have no clue who Richard Porter is.
Richard Porter, until the last year, was a 30-year or more partner at Kirkland and Ellis, which is a law firm with offices around the world, probably more than 20 offices. The main office started in
It doesn't matter.
Chicago.
The point is, it's a major law firm in Chicago and with globally, and he was a big shot at that firm. So he is a very accomplished lawyer, and he's
Right.
able to raise millions of dollars because there's so many lawyers from that firm that would like to have someone who had been a partner in that firm to be elected to the U.S. Senate.
Right. Across the state of Illinois, there will be help from that law firm or partners at the law firm, more accurately, and there will be help from partners across the country and across the world. Porter's told me when I talked to him about this possible run, which he made clear to me, it was my prediction, not his statement, that he will come out in early July and run for and announce that he's a candidate for the U.S. Senate. But he made clear to me, he said, you know, Jeff, this can be a really big race. People aren't counting on it now as a pickup for the Republicans in the margin they have now, 53 to 47. But if there's the money's there, if people in Illinois see that if we can see that they're ready for a different path, a better approach to foreign policy, domestic policy, and in the country of the USA, as well as a different path for the state of Illinois, well, there may be $100 million to support that U.S. Senate race.
Well, I would say easily, because we just had the run down in South Carolina with Tim Scott, and that went over $100 million, and that was South Carolina, which doesn't have the population or the money that Illinois has. Of course, you're going to draw money in from around the country for sure.
Yeah. So the other thing to know about Richard Porter, he's been on the RNC, the Republican National Committee, which has 2 representatives from each state, meeting with people from around the country, meeting with U.S. senators. He said he's on good terms with at least 50 of the 100 U.S. senators, and I think those include Democrats. It's not 50 Republicans and no Democrats.
Let me connect some.
So he is ready for this.
Go ahead. Let me connect some of the dots.
Let me just say one other. Well, let me just one
Go
thing.
ahead.
When he was 29 years old, he was the head of the Domestic Policy Council for the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. So that was in the late 80s, early 90s. And so that's how he started out. Then he became a lawyer, and he's kept up that involvement with national policy through 3 decades.
Okay, here's the question.
So
we have a Republican Party that has thrown out the Bushes and thrown out the establishment kind. Is Richard Porter going to be acceptable as a candidate? We saw that Darren Bailey was not as a run for governor. He wasn't accepted by the voters in the northern half of Illinois, where you have to get those votes if you're going to stand a chance to win. Are the Republicans going to embrace Richard Porter if he runs for the Senate, or are they going to say he's a rhino?
No, I think they will see the Illinois Republicans are ready to win. And Darren Bailey did a great job of working his butt off and marshaling the vote from downstate, but he couldn't do it upstate. He had some barriers. The accent his accent made him hard to understand, and so forth. Porter can compete upstate, but also downstate. I expect he'll have strong support from Darren Bailey and others who are rooted downstate, and he'll have that upstate. So, and I don't think he's going to be known as a rhino. He's going to be talking about the issues we're talking about, Terry. He'll be talking about what we've just done in Iran and why that was a remarkable strength that was exhibited by this country, and how that made the country safer.
Okay, let me insert that you've interviewed Porter before. We ran it on the Illinois channel. People can go to either of our websites and on YouTube and look that up, or just Google Richard Porter interview. The thing is, Porter, what's interesting, an interesting fact I think people would find, that he was the attorney that put together the deal with Elon Musk and Peter Thiel when they had PayPal being sold to another firm. It was Richard Porter who put together that deal representing Musk and Thiel before they had their millions. This is one of the big deals that really gave them millions of dollars from which they built from there. It also means that if Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are still on good terms with Richard Porter, and I have no reason to know that they're not, I think, in fact, Richard Porter talked to us about he went to Peter Thiel's house in New York before, just because they are friends, and went there for dinner. he should be able to raise considerable amounts of money, as we discussed, and everyone knows a U.S. Senate run would take millions of dollars. So that's another reason, besides his legal qualifications, that he would be, I think, a very viable candidate if he chooses to get in the race. I would also say he looks like a senator.
Well, he knows the issues. He has a vision, and he speaks out. He's been doing that for a long time. Those are three very important approaches to becoming the next U.S. Senator.
Okay.
You have to ask yourself about
Well, I want to
his
move
possible
along here.
Democratic.
We'll talk more
Okay.
about him in the future. We'll talk about others. The point is, there's also the context of what has gone on with the Democratic Party, what's been going on with President Trump, who now has been in office for about 5 months. And look at the success that Trump has been having. He just went to NATO again over this weekend. NATO agreed to pay 5% of their GDP. No one had ever thought they would get that done, and now NATO said, yes, we'll put 5% of our GDP into funding NATO. So it's not the United States who's just the only one keeping NATO alive with our checkbook. That was a big win. We have the Democratic Party without any leader. And so these races, Pritzker's run for the presidency, the run for the U.S. Senate, these are going to be happening in the context of what also is going on within these parties. And just yesterday or this week, we had a socialist/communist elect, or at least nominated by the Democratic Party in New York City to be the mayor. So the voters are looking at all of this, and I don't think that we are going to have these races where they're looking singularly at these candidates. There was a press conference we alluded to earlier with our cold open. Let me play, this is just some video, and I'm going to talk over it. This is incredible video shown at this press conference of our bombs going in and hitting the nuclear facility in Iran, which there was some discussion about did our bombs that went in, there were 6 bombs hitting the target. And look at this video, Jeff. These cameras are
Inside
right
the
on the
mission space.
shot. This is inside. Someone must have hacked into the camera systems that the Iranians had, because we're getting this video from inside. Look at that, it was just
Unlike
a hole
a normal
there
surface bomb,
where
you won't
these
see
bombs, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was saying, you don't get a huge crater with these bombs because they go so deep, and we can put pinpoint bombing, I mean pinpoint, where one bomb goes in right down the same hole as the other. There was a press conference or a press release of a preliminary report that said the bombing damage wasn't that spectacular, that the Iranian nuclear facility was not put out of business. Pete Hegseth, defense secretary, had a press conference this morning countering that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
How about the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission? The devastating U.S. strikes on Fordow destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility inoperable. Have any of these quotes made their way into the New York Times or the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN? Any of these quotes? How about this one? This is a new one from the UN, the United Nations. No friend of the United States, or certainly Israel often. Here's the head of the UN Atomic Energy Agency this morning, Rafael Grossi. U.S. and Israeli strikes caused enormous damage to Iran's nuclear sites. Don't take my word for it. How about the IDF's chief of staff? I can say here that the assessment is that we significantly damaged the nuclear program, setting it back by years. I repeat, years. The Iranian foreign minister, the spokesman, our nuclear installations have been badly damaged, that's for sure. I'm sure that's an understatement. John Radcliffe, the director of the CIA, putting out a statement just last night. CIA can confirm that a body of credible intelligence indicates Iran's nuclear program has been severely damaged by recent targeted strikes. This includes new intelligence from a historically reliable, very different than preliminary assessment with low confidence. He's saying historically reliable and accurate source and method that several key Iranian nuclear facilities were destroyed and would have to be rebuilt over the course of years.
So obviously, Pete Hegseth irritated that there was a reporting of a preliminary report. He wanted to counter that, as we just heard. And Jeff, the American people, there was a big initial reaction, positive reaction, as you would expect. But I think these issues are not to be judged in isolation, because with the NATO funding, with this bombing run, the tide is turning, and the president has had a number of successes. And we should also mention that right now, as we go into this coming weekend, the Senate Republicans are going to be trying to wrap up their work on the tax cut bill. It'll have to go to a conference committee. But Trump seems to be having some successes. What's your reaction to this?
Well, on the foreign policy side, he came in with 3 hotspots. He's now done a major job in dealing with, not over, but he's major job in dealing with Iran, Israel. Major push back at Iran. I mean, you could say, some would say, contrary to what was leaked out, that this didn't have any effect. Most people would say it had substantial effect. Even before the bombing on June 21, there was what Israel had done at Natanz, at Isfahan, and now what they've done at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. So those 3 sites are obviously, if they're not completely wiped out, which they may be, they're significantly destroyed, probably for years. And the nuclear scientists that were taken out, those are not easily replaced. Yes, over time you can, but there are at least 15 or 20 key personnel to the Iran nuclear program they're gone, they're dead, okay? And that was done mostly by Israel, but this president supported Israel in those efforts. So now he's got to turn to Russia and Ukraine. Can he do something there? Turn to Hamas in Israel. Can he do something there? If so, he would have done major work on foreign policy. At the same time, he's got this big bill coming through that prevents taxes from going up tremendously after being lowered for the last 5 years, or last 10 years, I guess.
Well, it'll make the tax cuts permanent. And in that, it means, unlike when they cut them in 2017, there was an expiration date on that tax cut. This bill will not have an expiration date. So a future Congress would have to pass their own bill to override the one that the President Trump and the Republican Congress is now working on.
They're trying to do this. The Republican Party is by July 4th. But there are various logistical reasons for doing that. And point of fact, to prevent those taxes from going up, people say tax cut is to prevent a major tax increase. They have to do it by the end of the calendar year.
Well, the other reason they want to get that done is because it has an extension of the debt, right? The debt ceiling.
That's right.
They have to extend that debt ceiling, or the Treasury Department won't be able to borrow money, which they have to do because we run deficits every year.
But the main point the president and the country have to keep their eyes on the ball. We need real GDP growth. It should be over 3%. It'd be nice to have it at 3.5%. The difference for this country, economically, militarily, and culturally, between a 2% growth rate and 3.5% is tremendous. The opportunities that are afforded low-income people to grow with that real GDP growth are tremendous. So the country moves ahead. If this administration, working, I hope, with the Democratic Party, can stimulate economic growth, real growth.
So what we see going on in the
jobs.
broad scheme here is we had the Republicans with Donald Trump, and now, of course, what they're going to do with this bill. Having successes, the Democratic Party is continuing to wander in the wilderness, the political wilderness, without a specific leader. J.B. Pritzker wants to be that leader. We'll have to see. He certainly will not be the only one running for president of the United States. He may be one of the more sane people running.
We should mention Pritzker may have a local opponent in the name of Rahm Emanuel, who's looking to run in the Democratic Party centrist lane.
Well, let's wrap it up here. We're just about out of time. But folks, as always, leave us your comments, and Jeff and I will keep an eye on what's going on. And hopefully you'll be there to watch us next time we join you. Jeff, I'll see you next time.
See you, folks.